This is NNI Bites, Big Learnings, a podcast where fellow healthcare professionals converse about the latest on nutrition science. Join us as Ranan Shamir and Luis Moreno share their knowledge and insights on complementary food and obesity.
Welcome to our podcast, NNI Bites, Big Learnings. My name is Ranan Shamir, and it's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Luis Moreno from the University of Zaragoza, Spain, to today's podcast. Professor Moreno is one of the greats in the field of pediatric nutrition and the world leader in pediatric obesity. Professor Moreno did his training as a medical doctor and his PhD thesis at the University of Zaragoza. He studied human nutrition in public and community health at the University of Nancy in France. He has participated in several research projects supported by the Spanish Ministry of Health and the European Commission. He has published more than 900 papers in peer-reviewed journals and is the coordinator of the GENUD, Growth, Exercise, Nutrition and Development Research Group at the University of Zaragoza. Professor Moreno is a former member of the Espegan Committee Nutrition and former president of the Spanish Nutrition Society. I could continue forever, but let's dive into today's episode of NNI Bites. Professor Moreno, today we are discussing a paper by you and your colleagues on complementary food and obesity, which appears in our latest issue of Annales Nestlé. So Luis, would you like to say a few words to our audience before we begin?
Thank you very much, Professor Shamir, for the kind introduction. Just to say that the complementary feeding periods is critical for the development of future eating habits and food preferences in children, and then for future health. It is important also to precise now that the information that we will comment is mainly related to the risk of obesity development.
Thank you, Luis. Let's dive into your paper. You start by stating that worldwide, obesity is the most common nutrition-related disorder in childhood. Could you elaborate on the worldwide prevalence and trends of overweight and obesity in children and adolescents?
Of course, the prevalence of childhood and adolescent overweight and obesity has increased significantly worldwide. Between 2000 and 2023, the combined prevalence of overweight and obesity reached 22.2%. with obesity alone affecting 8.5% of children and adolescents globally. However, regional disparities exist, with prevalence ranging from 0.4 in Vanuatu to 28.4% in Puerto Rico. In Europe, nearly 29% of children aged 7 to 9 years were classified as overweight, with boys showing higher prevalence than girls. Mediterranean countries like Cyprus, Greece, Spain, and Italy showed the highest rates in this region, while Tajikistan, Denmark, and Kazakhstan reported the lowest. Longitudinal trends show that obesity prevalence has more than doubled in most countries from 1990 to 2022, with the steepest increases occurring in regions such as Polynesia, Micronesia, Latin America, and the Middle East.
Wow, that's impressive. And you know, when families are coming, always they're afraid what will happen in the future with their obese children. Can you comment on the long-term consequences and economic impact of the increasing prevalence of overweight and obesity?
Thank you for the relevant question. To say that the increasing prevalence of childhood and adolescent overweight and obesity carries severe long-term health and economic consequences. Persisting into adulthood in many cases, obesity significantly increases the risk of cardiometabolic complications such as hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and dyslipidemia. Also, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease and cardiovascular conditions are also common, alongside psychological impacts like depression and social stigmatization. Economically, obesity substantially burdens healthcare systems and national productivity. Just as examples, obesity-related healthcare costs in China rose from 0.56% to 3.13% of total health expenditure within a decade, while in the case of Brazil, it anticipates cost to nearly double by 2050. The lifetime medical costs for a child with obesity are estimated at $19,000 more than for a child maintaining normal weight, with significant losses in productivity due to disability, absenteeism, and reduced life expectancy.
Wow. So you convince us that it is important to prevent obesity. But when the family comes to you or to me, they often ask, is my obese child going to be an obese adult? What are the chances of an obese children to become obese adults?
Again, a very relevant question. Prevention builds long-term health benefits by fostering sustainable habits and reducing the risk of chronic diseases such as type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, and also certain cancers. Unlike drugs, which often have limited efficacy and potential side effects, prevention tackles behavioral and environmental factors contributing to obesity. Economically, prevention is more cost-effective than long-term drug therapies, saving significant healthcare costs and minimizing productivity losses caused by absenteeism and disability. Moreover, prevention ensures equitable access to solutions, avoiding reliance on costly medications that may not be accessible to all populations.
Well, it was important what you told us now, but my question is, what is the chance of an overweight child to become an obese adult?
Yes, childhood obesity strongly predicts obesity in later life. Approximately 55% of children with obesity remain with obesity during adolescence, and 80% of adolescents with obesity continue to have obesity in adulthood. Furthermore, around 70% of individuals who had obesity in adolescence remain with obesity beyond the age of 30. The likelihood is even higher for severe obesity, with 78% of children with severe obesity retaining the condition over time. Children with obesity are also 5 times more likely to have obesity as adults compared to their normal weight peers.
So we are both convinced that obesity should be prevented. And the question and the reason we are here is discussing complementary feeding, whether complementary feeding plays a role in the prevention of overweight and obesity. So first, how would you define complementary feeding?
Yes, this is a critical and a key question. Complementary feeding refers to the gradual introduction of solid and liquid foods other than breast milk or infant formula, when these alone no longer meet an infant's nutritional needs. Typically, it is initiated between 4 to 6 months of age. This phase complements breastfeeding or formula feeding and provides essential energy, proteins, and micronutrients to support rapid growth and development.
Okay, thank you. So let's focus on the timing of introduction of complementary feeding. There is a confusion in the medical literature between exposure to formulas and exposure to solids. We are all in favor of exclusive breastfeeding until around 6 months of age, but the question we want to focus on is on the introduction of solids and the risk of overweight and obesity. So what happens when the solids are introduced before 4 months of age?
Introducing solid foods before 4 months of age is associated with an increased risk of obesity later in childhood. Studies show that early introduction may lead to higher BMI, body mass index, and increased adiposity, highlighting the importance of adhering to recommended guidelines that suggest introducing solids between 4 and 6 months. The timing is critical, as it affects the development of eating habits, hormonal regulation of appetite, and energy balance, all of which play important roles in terms of obesity development, and risk.
And what happens if solids are introduced after 6 months of age?
Introducing solid foods after 6 months of age may lead also to potential risks, including higher body mass index and increased adiposity during later childhood. Additionally, delaying the introduction of complementary foods beyond this period can result in nutritional deficiencies, particularly for key nutrients like iron and zinc, as breast milk or formula alone is no longer sufficient to meet an infant's energy and nutrient requirements. Furthermore, delayed introduction may hinder the establishment of diverse dietary habits, increasing also the risk of picky eating behaviors.
And does the evidence align with the recommendation of various organizations?
The timing of introducing solid foods align with most organizational guidelines, which recommend starting complementary feeding between 4 and 6 months to support optimal growth and development, while minimizing risks of obesity and nutritional deficiencies. The World Health Organization, however, recommends exclusive breastfeeding until 6 months, emphasizing this practice for low and middle-income countries. In these settings, exclusive breastfeeding protects against infections caused by unsafe water, poor sanitation, and food contamination, while providing reliable nutrition where access to nutrient-dense foods is limited. At the opposite, in high-income countries where sanitation and food safety are less of a concern, introducing solids between 4 and 6 months is more appropriate, preventing nutrient deficiencies and supporting healthy growth with increasing infection risks.
Thank you, Luis. But timing is not the only important factor. The content of complementary feeding matters as well. Does energy matter?
Yes, the energy content of complementary feeding is critical for healthy growth and development in infants. Diets high in energy-dense complementary foods can lead to excessive weight gain during infancy, increasing the risk of childhood obesity by 2 to 3 times. Conversely, insufficient energy intake may result in growth faltering. To achieve a healthy balance, complementary foods should provide adequate energy to support rapid growth while prioritizing nutrient-rich options that avoid excessive energy content.
And what about protein? I was impressed by the studies of Grasgruber and colleagues looking at the final height of populations in 152 places that showed a strong positive correlation between animal protein source in populations and higher final height in those populations. However, what about obesity risk in relation to animal protein versus vegetable consumption?
Thank you, Professor Shamir. This is a very controversial question, but as far as I reviewed the literature, I observed that high intake of animal protein, particularly from dairy, has been linked to increased levels of insulin-like growth factor, promoting fat deposition and increasing the likelihood of obesity in childhood. Conversely, diets emphasizing lean meats as the primary protein source are associated with healthier growth patterns without excessive weight gain. In contrast, early and consistent exposure to vegetables during complementary feeding offers protective benefits against obesity. Vegetables are nutrient-dense, low in energy, and help establish healthy eating habits and reduce the risk of excessive weight gain. While vegetables may be less palatable for infants, regular exposure improves their acceptance and long-term dietary patterns.
Thank you for this elaborate explanation on energy and protein. Now let's move to another thing, which is the baby-led weaning that many parents are asking in my clinic. Just for the audience, those who don't know, baby-led weaning is from 6 months on, infants joining the family at mealtimes, select what they eat, and they may feed themselves. Infants use their hands firstly, and then they use tableware. Infants decide what, how much, and how fast they eat, and adults decide what to offer, being just a facilitator. What is the evidence of the baby-led weaning prevents obesity?
Thank you, Professor Shamir. The evidence on baby-led weaning as a strategy to prevent obesity is currently inconclusive. A systematic review of 8 studies, 6 observational and 2 randomized controlled trials, found mixed results. While some studies reported lower weight gain and body mass index in infants fed through baby-led weaning, others found no significant differences compared to traditional spoon-feeding approaches. There is an important study, the BLISS study, Baby-Led Introduction to Solids, a trial, again a randomized controlled study, showing no significant differences in body mass index set scores between baby-led weaning and traditional feeding groups at 12 or 24 months. However, the baby-led weaning group exhibited behaviors such as less food fussiness and lower satiety responsiveness, which could influence long-term eating habits and potentially obesity risk.
Thank you, Luis. Now, in your paper, you discuss theories behind the effects of complementary feeding introduction on obesity, and I urge our audience to read the elaborated discussion. One thing that caught my eye is the effect of complementary feeding on the colonization of gut microbiota. Can you shortly tell our listeners a bit about the evidence connecting complementary feeding and gut microbiota that potentially may be associated with obesity?
Again, a very relevant question, Professor Shamir, and to say that complementary feeding plays a crucial role in shaping the gut microbiota, which may influence obesity risk. The introduction of solid foods increases microbial diversity with a shift from milk-associated bacteria like bifidobacteria to species such as Lactospiraceae and Ruminococcaceae, which are involved in polysaccharide degradation and also short-chain fatty acid production. These short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate, are linked to improved metabolic health and energy regulation. Certain microbial profiles, such as higher levels of Firmicutes and Clostridium species, have been associated with increased adiposity and body mass index, potentially affecting energy harvest and storage. Diets rich in fruits, vegetables, cereals, and fiber during complementary feeding promote beneficial gut microbiota, which may help mitigate obesity risk. Conversely, a less diverse microbiota or reduced beneficial bacteria during infancy can predict higher body mass index in later childhood. Probiotic supplementation has also been explored as an intervention, but in this case, results also remain inconclusive.
Professor Moreno, there is so much material in your excellent paper that we cannot hope to cover it all. I strongly urge listeners to download a copy from the NNI website, so perhaps we can wrap up by asking you to summarize what you see as the most effective nutrition intervention in infants and toddlers that can prevent obesity.
Thank you, Professor Shamir. I would say that the most effective nutrition intervention for preventing obesity in infants and toddlers focus on timely complementary feeding, but also breastfeeding promotion and parental education. Introducing complementary foods between 4 and 6 months of age with an emphasis on nutrient-dense, fiber-rich options like vegetables, fruits, and whole grains supports healthy growth while minimizing obesity risk. Breastfeeding for the first 6 months or more provides protective effects against excessive weight gain by influencing gut microbiota and hormonal regulation. Parental education on appropriate portion sizes, healthy food choices, and feeding behaviors plays also a critical role in reducing unhealthy feeding practices. Additionally, avoiding energy-dense foods during infancy further reduces the risk of rapid weight gain. These combined approaches establish healthy eating patterns early in life, reducing the likelihood of obesity and promoting long-term health.
Thank you, Professor Moreno, for walking us through this fascinating topic so clearly and helpfully. Let me end by summarizing Professor Moreno's key messages. You told us that the introduction of solid foods before months of age is also associated with an increased risk of obesity, and the introduction of solids around 6 months appears to be the optimal period. Early introduction of energy-dense foods and high protein intake, mainly from animal sources, are associated with an increased risk of obesity in childhood. The baby-led weaning approach for infant feeding has mixing results, but however, some studies suggest baby-led weaning might promote healthier eating behavior. You also told us about the importance of the diversity of gut microbiota. And finally, based on your paper and this discussion, provision of clear, consistent information and guidance from trusted sources on when, what, and how to feed infants during the complementary feeding period is essential to improve infants' future optimal eating behaviors and health. So, Professor Moreno, it has been a pleasure and true honor to have you share your huge experience, and I hope we have another opportunity soon to widen our knowledge and share your vision on a healthier future for children.
Thank you very much, Professor Shamir, for summarizing again. Just to say that I hope this information will be useful for practitioners and researchers with the goal of preventing obesity during childhood, adolescence, and later in life.
Thank you, Professor Luis Moreno, and thank you, our audience, for listening to this very special edition of our podcast, NNI Bites Big Learnings. Please subscribe to the NNI 365 app to ensure you don't miss future offerings.
And that concludes today's episode. Thank you for joining us with Ronan Shamir and Luis Moreno as we talked about complementary food and obesity. We hope you enjoyed and learned from this quick discussion, fellow experts. Till the next episode.